Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for being in this session. This is Adriana Gil Juarez from the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and I'm going to present this work in progress by Núria Vergés and myself on the responsibility that universities should have regarding digital gender-based violence. This work is part of a research project funded by the Minister of Science, Innovation and Universities, which aims to make visible and measure the problem of sexual and gender-based violence in universities, with the participation of 20 researchers from different universities. As a first step to make them visible, in this project we are creating a questionnaire constructed in a participatory way with the different groups that constitute the university community, that is, teaching staff, students, and administrative and service staff. Here, we summarize the main points why we believe a project like ours is necessary. And the reason for today's presentation is the orange point. There is a lack of reflection on the blended online and offline experiences of SGRB that cannot be understood as the simple sums on face-to-face and virtual experiences, but as a continuum that can range, for example, from sexist advertising to rape, always in a blended online-offline reality. Therefore, our objectives about digital gender-based violence are to develop a more complex understanding of SGRB in blended realities, to give visibility to the specificities of SGRB that occur in virtual spaces, and facilitate the university to acknowledge their responsibilities in this context. To design a questionnaire on SGRB based on a broader and blended vision and collective reconceptualization of the problem. Among the different definitions of DGBV, we work with these feminist definitions. They can be defined as acts of gender-based violence that have been committed, instigated, or aggravated in part or in whole through the use of ICTs via mobile phones, the internet, social media, platforms, or email. What we have done so far: literature analysis, analysis of previous questionnaires, first focus groups, and creating the web. On the website, we have the resource map section where you can consult different maps of resources against sexual and gender-based violence in different cities. Up to now, you can consult the maps of resources in these cities: Catalonia, Basque Country, and Madrid in Spain, and Hidalgo, Mexico City, and Puebla in Mexico, from a related side project we did with this country. What we have found so far about digital gender-based violence. And in relation to literature, methodologically, we did a mixed literature review that combines a systematic review with a derivative review. For this systematic review, we examined 43 articles included in databases up to 2020 that responded to the keywords online misogyny, cyber violence against women, online gender violence, online violence against women, machoist online violence, and online gender-based violence. The resulting articles belong to a variety of disciplines, although communication, gender studies, and sociology predominate. Although the first article appeared was in 2014, the majority were published from 2017 onwards, mostly in Northern English-speaking countries and almost entirely from academic institutions. This shows the recent and gradual interest, but also the need to research and publish from other countries. The rest of the publications included derived from our previous work with the feminist group Donna Stead on cybersecurity, gender and gender-based violence. What we have found in the literature is divided into these 5 categories: who aggresses and who they attack, ways of exercising DGBV, the response of institutions and platforms strategies of feminist LGBTQI people and women's organizations. Universities could use their ICT and human resources to detect and prevent DGBV besides supporting survivors. All the sources we have used and this complete review can be found in this article in Press, a situated approach to online gender-based violence and ways to counter them, in the journal Estudios Feministas. Although some data come from broader studies on cyberbullying in general, and the studies differ in percentages by country, year of publication, and definitions, they agree on some trends regarding online gender-based violence relevant to understand the phenomenon. DGBV is perpetrated by known people, especially partners and ex-partners, but also by family members, colleagues, work colleagues, neighbors, or clients, as happens offline. And the vast majority of them are men. As in offline violence, the aggressors are mainly cis-male heterosexual, motivated by power, the desire to dominate, control, and continue imposing this cis heteropatriarchal norm. However, the particularity of online violence is that it allows for the multiplication of aggressors and a greater degree of anonymity. The European Women's Lobby defined several profiles of online abusers: Maki trolls, creep shooters, porn avengers, online groomers, cyberstalkers, masculinists, cyberbulliers, sexual predators, recruiters, doxers, malicious distributors, crackers, and manospheres or virtual manhood. At least 11% of European women, 9 million, had been victims of DGBV. 21% had experienced it for more than 2 years, and 23% had to change their email or phone number, and between 63 to 83% of women who had been assaulted changed their use of ICTs. 70% of women who have experienced DGBV have also experienced at least one form of physical or sexual violence from their partner. 37% of feminist women experience sexual threats online. DGBV affects young women. For example, in the 2019 macro survey on violence against women in Spain, the 16 to 24 age group is the most affected. These violence are severe among teenagers. 1 in 4 European girls have experienced cyberbullying, and 87% of sized images of child sexual abuse were of girls. Compared to heterosexuals, there is a higher incidence among LGBTQI people, and other multiple intersections, such as racialized women and people with disabilities, are also relevant. About the ways of exercising DGBV, there are 3 main groups. First, violence with highly sexist and sex-gender-based discourses that seek to devalue women, LGBTQI people, and their achievements, especially feminists, gamers, academics, artists, sportswomen, politicians, or journalists, among other empowered or vocal women. Examples of these are insults, cyberbullying, mansplaining, hate speech, threats, flaming, evil, and false accusations. Second, highly technological gender-based violence that seeks to magnify its effects, virality, and groupness. It requires certain technical knowledge, and it's rarely countered because of the gender-digital divide. For example, doxing, tracking, impersonation, use of spyware, attacks on servers, websites or feminist profiles, and pumping, which is sometimes carried out in groups, and seeks to silence or make certain profiles invisible. Third, violence with a high sexual component that seeks to harm as well as control women's bodies and sexuality. They involve rape culture, hegemonic masculinity, that reinforces the heteropatriarchal norm and are signs of domination. For example, sexual comments, harassment, and insults, rape threats, online recruitment for the purpose of trafficking for prostitution, sextortion, and grooming of minors, non-consensual pornography, recording and broadcasting sexual aggression against women. About the response of institutions and platforms, 60% of reported assaults on the internet are not investigated, and only 1 in 3 reported assaults result in any action by the internet providers or platforms on which the assault occurs. Only 26% of the 86 countries surveyed by the United Nations legally prosecute gender-based violence. Social media platforms do not react promptly and adequately to sexist attacks. Their inaction intensifies violence, encourages and protects aggressors. Their publication policies end up censoring the claims of women, LGBTQI people, and feminists, limiting their agency. The lack of action to prosecute and punish DGBV by those responsible for public and private online communication generates impunity for the aggressors and their support groups, causing the problem to persist, grow, and become worse. Feminist, LGBTQI people, and women organizations have already activated self-defense strategies, multiple and diverse, and are sometimes activated simultaneously. The eradication of online gender-based violence can only be achieved by confronting the aggressors, eradicating this type of violence, and generating other types of online and offline relationships. Strategies are care and self-care, digital risk analysis, auto-doxing or doxing the aggressors, increasing the security of our online practices, creating safe, violence-free spaces and discourses, research inside outside the academy on this type of violence, build headlines to denounce what is happening to us and to demand structural changes from the institutions and platforms responsible. Use confrontational strategies and counter campaigns, for example, Me Too, showcasing the aggressor with high-tech tools, parody, irony, humor as a way of interacting in response to aggressions on certain occasions. On this point, on what universities can do, I would like to highlight the work of Rodriguez and Eras, who make a very concrete proposal on how to use the resources of universities to tackle sexual harassment, for example, with what they call the University ICT Strategy Against Gender-Based Violence. They talk about specific programs for detecting and dealing with cyberbullying, professional IT support for survivors, Trojan horse detection, dedicated websites, participation channels, and email addresses, programs against gender digital gap, dissemination and awareness raising on social networks, specific applications for smartphones. And though there are some privacy concerns to be addressed in this proposal, it opens up the possibility of thinking about the resources we already have at hand for the eradication of the GBV at the universities. In relation to first focus groups, we have used our networks to get in touch with people who wanted to participate in our project, and those are our gatekeepers, entities, groups, and individuals who have collaborated in the management, organization, or facilitation of contacts for the focus groups. Centre Joan Rivière en Psicologia i Gènere, who contacted survivors of sexual and gender-based violence at the university. Fields Feministas, Fememoria, Femihistoria collaborated in the search for transgender and non-binary people. Asociación de Mujeres Investigadoras y Tecnólogas en Cataluña, who facilitated contacts with people in the university community who were in male-dominated careers. TOC 2.0 Barcelona and Salut Mental Catalunya, who facilitated contacts of persons suffering from psychiatric psychological disorders with or without diagnosis. Connexus, who contacted survivors and experts on sexual and gender-based violence from the equality units of the universities. And Laura San Miquel, who helped us to contact with people with diverse physical abilities. These contacts helped us to set up two mixed online groups of the university community, administration and service staff, teaching and research staff, and students with 16 participants in total, and 9 specific online discussion groups with people whose experience of violence at the university has been barely explored. Although we aim for at least 8 participants for each group, the online condition and the COVID context allowed us to have the number of participants shown in each row. One of the questions we asked in the focus groups was how they understood or defined gender and sexual violence at university and how and where it manifests itself. And here we dealt with the issue of digital gender-based violence if it did not come up. With regard to digital gender violence, it is interesting that when it was known or identified as a type of violence that also occurs in the university, it was mentioned in relation to how universities are not carrying out actions to prevent or eradicate it, and how in many cases it is still not included in protocols. So what we have found in focus groups is divided into these categories. The need to go beyond a punitive logic that does not face the structural problem. The duty of universities to create a climate adverse to DGBV. The education on how knowledge is produced and transmitted within hierarchic teams, and the inclusion of DGBV in their guidelines, including any aggression or harassment between members of the academic community happening in off-campus virtual environments. An example from the category Go Beyond a Punitive Logic, I see very clearly that the university is not only what happens within the walls of the faculty or even the campus, and even more so in the 21st century, it's like it's absurd to think that the university is only what happens in that physical space, when it's also the virtual campus, it's the internships, it's the class WhatsApp group. In that sense, I think that the university, more than a punitive approach to discriminatory or violent behavior or practices that occur in each of these spaces, should have more of a cultural responsibility to say that this has happened. Why did it happen? And let's repair the damage rather than punish the violent individual. Because if we understand that it is a structural problem and it is a problem that is partly cultural, if we understand that is a generalized systemic problem, we are not going to be able to intervene by punishing individuals who, for some reason, which seems arbitrary, have engaged in sexist behavior or whatever. In this sense, I believe that the university has a responsibility. An example from the category, create a climate adverse to DGBV. But I don't think it is a fundamental issue, that of digital violence, and that is the responsibility, let's say, of the university to provide protection or a response to these aggressions, because sometimes they make it impossible for students to continue with their studies, and many times can be classmates. How to help? The university must take responsibility and say something if in a group of students this is happening to a girl, if she is suffering harassment, if she is suffering anonymous attacks, whatever it is, we can't pretend we don't see it. There must be a minimum action from the teaching staff, questioning what is happening, at least discussing it, and deactivate it in a certain way. So we must invent ways to respond to this and to make it a group debate, to make it clear that we can harass, that we can support someone who is always bothering someone else. We need to attack it in some way. I don't know. An example from the category, how knowledge is produced and transmitted. Here we also get into questions of how each person understands gender. I mean, there are many teachers who deny that there are other genders apart from male or female and insist that the opposite is a pathology with target positions for political reasons. And of course, there the teachers have much more power, and when they argue with their knowledge why there are no more than two genders or no other possibilities, then the student is very defenseless because perhaps they don't have so much knowledge to be able to defend themselves with theoretical arguments, and then they have everything to lose, apart from the fact that the teacher is the one who has to evaluate. So there is a power relationship, which, well, they are complicated situations. An example from the category, inclusion of DGBV in universities' guidelines, including those happening in off-campus virtual environments. In some situations where the issue has been raised, it is true that the initial response of the institution is legally we have no responsibility in this. We are not involved. We are not going to get involved in this problem. We are responsible for Moodle, yes, for forums, yes, but not for everything that is outside. So of course, we have no legal responsibility. But what is the university? What role, what function does university have as a social institution? Well, maybe there is no legal responsibility, but ethically there is. We have a part of responsibility because we are supposed to educate and make citizens, or we contribute to making citizens more critical, or so we thought at some point. But I think it will be a battle with the legal departments because the university says that this strictly does not concern us. Well, I think it should also concern us. So in a closing remark, as a social institutions, universities have to recognize their responsibilities not only in the detection, prevention, accompaniment, reparation, and eradication of DGBV, but also in a cultural transformation, removing bureaucratic barriers and transforming their statutes as much as necessary. They have to work together with equality units and feminist activists in university, understanding and transforming the structural dimension of this violence. Universities have ethical responsibilities as educators of citizens, producers of knowledge, and reproducers of social practices, and therefore have to guarantee violence-free universities. They have infrastructure and human resources to put them at the service of eradicating DGBV. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any comments or questions, I will gladly try to answer them as best as possible.